In this video, I will talk about Earth's greenhouse effect and how are human activities contributing to the intensification of the greenhouse effect, thus leading to climate change. So let's take a look at this diagram which you have in your worksheet 2.10. It all begins with incoming solar radiation from the sun that reaches the Earth's atmosphere as shortwave radiation. So some of the shortwave radiation will get reflected away by cloud cover. As you have learned before, clouds help to lower temperature around us as it reflects some of the solar energy in space. Some of the shortwave radiation that does not get reflected away enters through the atmosphere and then warms the Earth's surface. The warmed up Earth's surface then radiates the heat outwards as long-wave radiation. Some of the long-wave radiation will escape back into space, as I'm trying to show here with my cursor, but some of it gets trapped within the atmosphere with the help of greenhouse gases. And here are three of the most potent greenhouse gases that you should know. The first would be carbon dioxide, which lasts the longest in the atmosphere, and this is the main culprit for the enhanced greenhouse effect, or what we would know today as global warming. And second, this is followed by methane, which does not last as long as CO2. It doesn't last as long in our atmosphere, but it traps about 30 times more heat than CO2. And lastly, nitrous oxide, which is ranked after CO2 and CH4 in its potency in trapping heat. It's mainly caused by the use of fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, to boost crop production in farms. Well, the greenhouse effect's purpose is to keep the Earth's atmosphere warm to sustain life with the help of naturally occurring greenhouse gases. Many human activities have released larger concentrations of greenhouse gases that have contributed to increasing the heat trapping capacity of the Earth's atmosphere. This is why we are experiencing global warming today. So we're moving on to look at the anthropogenic causes of climate change. Now, climate change can be caused by natural factors as well as anthropogenic factors. Today, we will be focusing on anthropogenic factors, which is a scientific term for human factors, such as deforestation, right? Changing land use, such as agriculture, industries, and urbanization. Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram, which is actually found in practice 1 of your worksheet on page 3. What does this infographic say about the impact of deforestation on the Earth's climate? So this infographic shows us that an intact forest can contain 165 tons of carbon per hectare. Upon its deforestation, 165 tons of carbon per hectare is released into the atmosphere immediately. And concerned environmentalists would promote efforts such as reforestation to grow back the trees, to restore forests. And though this is an attempt at reducing the effects of deforestation on climate change, it is actually an uphill challenge because, as you can see here, if you recall, in lower sec geography, you have learned that it takes up to 30 years or more for tree saplings to reach full maturity. And so the rate of carbon capture, which means the reabsorption of carbon from the atmosphere by trees, happens at a very slow rate of about 2 to 5 tons of carbon per hectare per year. This is a much lower rate of carbon capture or carbon accumulation as compared to the rate of carbon emissions when deforestation happens. And take note that as trees are growing, deforestation is still happening worldwide. So why is it that deforestation is capable of releasing so much carbon at one go? Let's find out how this works. In the year 2019, we see the world's biggest forest fire in Brazil, and this happened because loggers and farmers alike were clearing land for various economic reasons. Right, so this map is showing us the extent of forest fires happening in the Amazon territory within a combination of countries like Brazil, Peru, and so on. The areas that were being burned stretched over 10,000 square kilometers. What we need to understand about rainforests is that the soil contains high amounts of carbon, and the carbon is accumulated over many years of decomposition of dead organic matter. Because rainforests tend to be located in a climatic zone that experiences the equatorial climate, which means that it's a very hot and humid climate. The climatic conditions are perfect for things to break down easily and for rates of decomposition to increase. So the moment trees are removed from the surface, this exposes soil to sunlight. The light acts as a catalyst for a chemical reaction called carbon oxidation, whereby the carbon stored in soil reacts with oxygen in the air to turn into carbon dioxide. And hence, huge amounts of carbon dioxide are released from the exposed soil to the atmosphere. So this is how tons of carbon are released into the atmosphere immediately. And at the same time, there are fewer trees to capture carbon dioxide to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Bearing in mind that young tree saplings may take up to 30 years to grow to full maturity before they can fully capture more CO2, the rate of CO2 absorption is slowed down drastically, despite our efforts at carrying out reforestation. So actually the best solution to fighting climate change is really to stop cutting down trees. But for economic reasons, I don't see this happening anytime soon. Okay, so the two key reasons why rainforests are being destroyed in Brazil are the fact that Brazil depends heavily on soy cultivation and cattle ranching. As the world's population grows bigger, there will be a higher demand for food. And as disposable income grows higher worldwide, there will be a bigger demand for premium food such as meat, especially beef. So this will then lead to a greater demand for more forested land to be cleared in order to expand farms to produce more food intensely. It was found in the year 2017 that 90% of Brazil's soybeans were cultivated not for human consumption, but for animal consumption. This is so that animal farms can breed more quality animals to produce more quality meat, right? To meet the world's growing demand for meat products. So the soybeans are brought over to huge cattle ranches, and in cattle ranches, they have hundreds, thousands of cattle that release methane as waste gas. So the methane emissions will increase as cattle farms expand to meet the growing demands for meat and dairy products. If you recall, methane is 30 times more potent in trapping heat as compared to carbon dioxide. But it's not just the release of methane from cattle. Food production becomes more intense, and so they want to produce larger volumes of food, produce food faster, and they also want to cut costs spent on manpower, on labor, right? All this is done to try to increase profits for agribusinesses, which means corporations that are the owners of farms and farmers. So hence comes farm machinery, which require fossil fuels to be burnt to produce energy. So as fossil fuels are burnt, huge amounts of CO2 gets released into the atmosphere. All right. At the same time, to intensify the growth of crops, artificial fertilizers are used to speed up their growth and to ensure that they get quality nutrients from the soil. So as artificial fertilizers break down in soil, huge amounts of nitrous oxide, a type of GHG, which stands for greenhouse gases, are released into the air. At this point, you may want to pause at the end of this slide to see a summary of how agriculture and deforestation are responsible for the release of greenhouse gases. Okay. Moving on to the next case study, we look at the top emitters of carbon. From the year 1965 to the year 2017, we see that there have been some changes to the carbon emissions from China, US, and the European Union. Since 1965, the US had been the top emitter of carbon. At about 22.5% of global emissions came from the USA. And it wasn't until 2005 that China started exceeding the US in its carbon emissions. Right? So while we notice the US and the EU trying to reduce their carbon emissions, China doesn't seem to relent in its rate of carbon emissions. It increased up to 9.2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. And why is this so? You see, many things around the world are made in China. So industrialization plays a big role in China's economy. To give you a better picture of China's manufacturing, let's take a look at this graph. This is showing us that in 2016, the highest value added in manufacturing of $3,080 billion came from China. And in the same year, more than 1/4 of China's revenue is generated by manufacturing. About 27% of China's gross domestic product, GDP, was generated by manufacturing. GDP is a term we use to refer to the revenue earned by a country's economic activities combined. So this means that manufacturing actually provides jobs for millions of Chinese workers because there's a demand for many things to be made in China. More jobs are created in the manufacturing industry for the benefit of Chinese workers. So the majority of Chinese workers in China depend on manufacturing to support themselves and their families. And this explains why manufacturing is such a big deal in China. China's manufacturing industry meets global demands for various products such as our personal computers, our smartphones, aircon, shoes, clothing, ships, and even cement. China is the world's top producer of cement, which is a very important raw building material. Right. So the reason why China is such a huge manufacturing hub is that it offers low labor costs. And Chinese workers are willing to work very long hours to speed up production. They also offer low tax rates to attract multinational companies to invest in factories in China. So to make itself more attractive, to draw more foreign investment, the Chinese government invests very heavily in urbanization. Right? So this is about clearing away rural villages to transform them into attractive cities where talented people can live, work, and play. And thus they create a creative talent pool that can help to attract more multinational companies to invest in China's economy. Right? So the Chinese government correlates, or rather they link urban cities with a positive economic growth. And hence they prioritize expanding and building more cities. This means that more urban infrastructure such as roads are being built. The reason for building cities is to provide skilled labor for high-value businesses from multinational companies. In the year 2010, it was estimated that 45% of China's population lived in cities. Their target is that by 2030, 60% of China's population will live in cities. Right, and as explained just now, the reason for urbanization happening so rapidly in China is to attract multinational companies like fashion labels, tech companies, for them to tap on the educated workforce and modern infrastructure found in cities. The fact that urbanization is happening so rapidly in China means that there is now a higher demand for energy to provide energy for motorized transport to move goods and people, to provide power for daily activities, right, involving electrical appliances, and most importantly, to provide power for the city's infrastructure to work so that basic daily operations can run seamlessly. The problem with China's energy source is that it comes from coal, a type of fossil fuel that releases the highest amounts of carbon and soot into the air. Coal-fired power plants generate the majority of 65% of China's total electricity supply. Today in Singapore, most of our electrical supply is generated from natural gas, which is a much cleaner form of fossil fuel. To meet high demands of energy for urbanization and manufacturing, in the year 2018, the Chinese government, much to the disagreement of many countries, approved $6.7 billion worth of coal mining projects. This means they want to dig up more coal from their local territories. And their imports of coal also increased by 9%. So it may seem like China doesn't really care about the concerns of global warming. And as a result of that, China has become one of the world's top producers, top emitters of greenhouse gases because of the burning of coal. So you may want to pause at this slide to view this summary about why industrialization and urbanization have high carbon footprint. That means, why do they emit such high amounts of carbon? So for the content that I've just lectured about in the PowerPoint slides, you can find them in your pages of Weather and Climate Worksheet 2.10. I would advise you now to pause the video at this point and attempt these regulate questions. Question 1, describe how deforestation and agriculture are contributing to climate change. And question 2, discuss how industrial land use and urbanization are aggravating global warming. Please read through these notes thoroughly, or you may replay this lecture video to review the content that I've covered. And I will follow up with another video to review the questions about the human causes of climate change as featured here on this page. I wish you luck, all the best for your home-based learning, and take care.